Welcome to another English class. English is very vital, you must agree with me. And today we'll be looking at the topic adjectival clause. Adjectival clause. Some people refer to it as adjective clause. And basically another name for it is relative clause. So if you don't want to call it adjectival clause, you don't want to call it adjective clause, you can as well call it relative clause. Alright, before we go into the topic proper, I would like to intimate us on what clauses are and the division of clauses. Then we'll move strictly to adjectival clause, or what I call adjective clause or relative clause. But before we go into that, let's look at our learning objectives. So by the end of the lesson, students should be able to define adjective and adjectival clause, mention the types, give sentence examples, and state the functions. Alright, so that is what we tend to achieve by the end of the lesson. Okay, before we look at the definition of adjective and adjectival clause, I did mention that it's necessary for us to know what clauses are and the types of clauses that we have and the emergence of the adjective or adjectival clause. Now, clauses basically are a group of words that have finite verbs. They can stand on their own and they make sense. That's clauses. They are a group of words that have finite verbs. They can stand on their own and they make sense. Now, we'll look at adjectives. Adjectives are words that are used to describe nouns or pronouns. Adjectives are words used to describe nouns or pronouns. Now, under clauses, we have two types of clauses. You have the main clause and the subordinate clause. Now, the main clause is also called the independent clause, while the subordinate clause is called the dependent clause. Now, from these two clause types, we have a division of the subordinates. The subordinate clause is classified into three. That's where you have the adjectival clause, you have the adverbial clause, and you have the noun clause. Alright, so that's the subordinate clause. Now, it is the subordinate part of the sentence that we consider when looking at the grammatical names and functions. So, adjectival clauses are classified under what we call grammatical names and functions in the comprehension part of the English exam. So we are looking at this topic because aside our knowledge on grammar, it will help us attempt questions in our external exams, basically NECO and WAEC in your comprehension part. Remember, in the NECO exam or WAEC exam, the theory parts comprise topics as letter writing, comprehension, and summary. So under the comprehension part of the theory questions, you will definitely come across any of the grammatical names and functions. So treating adjectival clause, it's important at a time like this. So let's go into the topic proper. We said that adjectival clause, also called relative clause, is a dependent clause that gives information, or we say modifies. Now when you say that something modifies, that means it gives extra information on a particular thing. As a matter of fact, in English language, you have two word modifiers, and these two word modifiers are classified under the parts of speech, and they are the adjective and the adverbs. So once you mention word modifiers, you're looking at adjectives and adverbs. To modify a word means to add extra meaning to a word. So adjectival clause, which is also called the relative clause, is a dependent clause that gives information about a noun or a pronoun in the main clause. Remember, I told us that clauses are a group of words that have finite verbs and stand on their own and they make sense. I went ahead to mention that we have two types of clauses. We have the main clause and the subordinate clause, which also called the independent and the dependent clause. Reason for having the dependent clause as that part of the sentence that gives extra information about a noun or a pronoun in the main clause. Alright, so looking at the Collins Dictionary, it defines adjectival clause as a relative clause that modifies a noun or a pronoun. A relative clause that modifies a noun or a pronoun. Now, I did not mention the reason for referring adjectival clause as relative clause. It's that the words that introduce adjectival clause, it's the relative pronoun. Words that introduce adjectival clause are the relative pronouns. So once you want to identify your adjectival clause, look out for these relative pronouns. As we continue, you will be acquainted with the relative pronouns which introduce the adjectival clause, reason for calling it relative clause. Right, so according to the Oxford Learner's Dictionary, a relative clause is one referring to an earlier noun, sentence, or part of speech. So the relative clause refers to a noun earlier mentioned. It refers to a sentence or part of a sentence. I did like to clear something, that a sentence is different from a clause. Now get it right. It is very possible for you to get a clause from a sentence, all right? But it will be hard for you to actually refer to a clause as a sentence. Reason being that clauses are divided into two. But if you're looking at basically the main clause, then you could actually refer to the main clause as a sentence. But because we are looking at clause holistically, you can't say that a clause is a sentence. But rather in a sentence, you can get a clause from a sentence. You can get either the main clause or the subordinate clause in a sentence. And that will bring us to the sentence types that we have, but that's not what we have for today. But know that in your definition of a clause, it will be wrong for you to say that a clause is a sentence. A clause is not a sentence. A clause rather is a group of words that has a finite verb, can stand on its own, and makes sense. Alright, this is what we have. Adjective clause. It's a dependent clause that functions as an adjective. A dependent clause that functions as an adjective. Now look at this sentence. It says, the angry tiger snarled at me. The angry tiger snarled at me. In this, we just have a simple sentence. The angry tiger snarled at me. It's just a simple sentence. Now we have angry as the adjective describing the tiger. Alright? It modifies. We can say the tiger snarled at me. But remember, we said that adjectives modify. That means adjectives add extra meaning. So removing the adjective angry, we still have a sentence. That's the tiger snarled at me. But we want to know the state of the tiger. And we have added the word angry, which is an adjective that modifies. So adding this angry to the sentence gives it another meaning entirely. So it tells us that there is this tiger. It is not just a tiger, but an angry tiger that snarled at me. Alright, so this is what it is. Adjectives describing a tiger. We cannot say that this is an adjectival clause. Alright, we just have an adjective. Well, now look at the second sentence. The second sentence says, the tiger that was angry snarled at me. The tiger that was angry snarled at me. Alright, so looking at this sentence, you have the subordinate clause and you have the main clause. Now one would ask, how do I distinguish the subordinate clause from the main clause in a sentence like this? You can see where we have a group of words written in red. That's your subordinates. Remember, we said that adjective clauses are dependent clauses that function as adjectives. So the that was angry is the subordinate clause. Now, if I pull out that was angry, I can as well read the sentence without that was angry. Now, the sentence becomes, the tiger snarled at me. That's what it is. So, adding the subordinate part of this sentence to the main clause, it gives us what we call a complex sentence. A complex sentence is that sentence that has one main clause and one or more subordinate clauses. In this case, we just have a main clause and a subordinate clause. The subordinate clause is that was angry, and that is where we have our adjective clause. Now, what's the function of this that was angry, that's the adjective clause. The function is that it modifies the noun tiger. The tiger is what is being described. The tiger is what is being mentioned. So basically, we have achieved the definition of adjective clause, and we have as well achieved the function at the peripheral level. So when we continue, we'll also get a deeper understanding of the topic. Now, there are key points to remember when looking at adjectival clauses. Now, using adjective clauses can be done easily if you know what all they contain and how they are formed. Before you learn the structure of an adjective clause, you should remember that an adjective clause will always be a dependent clause. It must be a dependent clause. An adjective clause can never be the main clause. It has to be the dependent clause, because it's in the dependent clause that we have the word that introduces adjectival clause, and that is the relative pronoun. Alright, so that being said, one other thing we must know is that adjective clause will always be followed by the subject or object in the sentence. There is always a subject and there is always an object in the sentence. You cannot negate that fact. There is always a subject and there is an object too. So as far as the structure of an adjective clause is concerned, it begins with a relative pronoun. I mentioned that. So for you to identify your adjective or adjectival clause, you must be conversant with your relative pronouns, which I've mentioned here. But I need to clear something. Now, remember I said we have three grammatical names. Basically, we have three grammatical names. Alright, you have the adjective or adjectival clause, you have the adverbial clause, you have the noun clause. Now, some of these words, if not most of them, when looking at the noun clause, can as well appear in them. So the onus is on us to pay attention to know when to differentiate between the adjectival clause and the noun clause. Okay, so time would not permit us for today, but we'll definitely get a note on noun clause so that we'll distinguish between identifying the noun clause and the relative clause using these words that have been mentioned. So for the relative pronouns, we have who, that, which, whose, whom, where, when, whoever, and whomever. And we must note that they come immediately after the noun or noun phrase it is modifying. This is the man whose car was stolen. In the sentence, this is the man whose car was stolen. And the subordinate part of the sentence is underlined. That is whose car was stolen. And you're asked to identify the grammatical name and the function. Remember we said that immediately after the relative, or rather before the relative pronoun, there is always a noun. There is always a noun that comes before the relative pronoun. So this is the man. Man is a noun whose car was stolen. So the person I'm talking about or describing is the man, and that's the function. It modifies or qualifies the noun man. So if there is no noun, to an extent I've been able to separate or distinguish between the noun clause and the relative clause. So once you have a noun before any of these relative pronouns, or you have a pronoun before any of these relative pronouns, or you have a noun phrase before any of these relative pronouns, you know that the grammatical name there is adjectival clause, and it will describe or modify that very noun that you have before it, or the very pronoun. Remember, adjectival clause is different from adjectival phrase, but because what we have for today is adjectival clause, we will not delve into adjectival phrase. But in a nutshell, adjectival phrases are different from adjectival clauses by virtue of the presence of the finite verb in the adjectival clause. For adjectival phrases, we do not have finite verbs. That's just the only difference between the adjectival clause and adjectival phrase. But the functions are still the same. Now, the function of an adjectival clause is that it modifies the noun or pronoun in a sentence. That's key. Grammatical names and functions. Adjectival clause is a grammatical name, and you'll definitely be asked what is the function of this adjectival clause. If you have identified a group of words as adjectival clause, the next question that comes in that comprehension passage is that you have to identify the function of the adjectival clause. And for you to identify the function, you have to look out for the noun before the relative pronoun. So if it's a noun, you know that it's describing the noun, but if it's a pronoun, you know it's describing a pronoun. Alright, we have types of adjective clauses. Basically, we have two types of adjective clauses. Adjective clauses are divided into two. You have the essential adjective clauses, which can also be called restrictive, and you have non-essential adjective clauses, which is called non-restrictive. Now let's look at the essential adjectival clause, which is also called restrictive. As the name suggests, an essential adjective clause is one that is required to make sense of the sentence. It is a part of the sentence, and the description is what matters, and so it is necessary to make the sentence meaningful. Hence, cannot be removed from the sentence. No specific punctuation marks are used to separate the clause from the rest of the sentence. Alright, so these are some of the examples, but let me throw more light on that. Now, when we talk about restrictive or essential, in a sentence where you want to identify your adjectival clause, we have it in such a way that it runs through. If you remove a part of the sentence, it will be affected. That means the sentence wouldn't be meaningful again. But once you remove this part of the sentence and the sentence is still there, it is called non-restrictive. But for restrictive, it tells you that the sentence must not observe any punctuation in between aside the full stop. So in a sentence where I have Mr. Smith visited the boy who was kidnapped last week. Mr. Smith visited the boy who was kidnapped last week. You will agree with me that there is no other punctuation aside the full stop. So in this type of sentence that I made, the adjectival clause there will be essential, what we call restrictive. I'm restricting the meaning to the whole sentence. There is no form of division in that sentence. So you have, my neighbor does not like children who sit for hours fidgeting with their smartphones. Who sit for hours fidgeting. So the bolded part of the sentence shows the grammatical name, which is adjectival clause. And you'll see that I have, my neighbor does not like children. That's the main clause. Who sit for hours fidgeting with their phones. That's the subordinate clause. So in this type of sentence, we'll call it restrictive adjectival clause because it's restricted basically to that sentence. You cannot remove it. If I remove who sit for hours fidgeting with their phones, their smartphones, you see that the sentence will not be complete. Alright, so that's non-restrictive. Which other way do we identify non-restrictive? You don't have any commas separating a particular part of the sentence from the other. It runs through and it's basically towards the end of the sentence. The restrictive ends the sentence, but when we get to non-restrictive, you know how to identify them. So in this restrictive adjectival clause, we have children before the relative pronoun. So having children before the relative pronoun simply tells you what? That the function of this adjectival clause is that it modifies the noun children. Now the children has to be put in quotes. In answering your question, what is the grammatical name? The grammatical name of the underlined sentence or the sentence written in italics or in bold letters is adjectival clause. Now what is the function of this adjectival clause? It modifies the noun. Before you write the noun, you open a quotation mark, put the children, then close up your quotation. Right, so when we continue, we'll see them. So we did not find any cafe that sold vegetarian momos. We did not find any cafe that sold vegetarian momos. Now, this is another restrictive type of adjectival clause. We did not find any cafe that sold vegetarian momos. So the grammatical name here is adjectival clause. And what's the function? It modifies the noun cafe. Cafe is a noun. It's a place where people go to eat. So you must be conversant with your parts of speech. If you must also know how to identify the function of any of the grammatical names we have. Alright, the non-essential adjective clause or non-restrictive is called non-essential or non-restrictive. Now when we talk about the word non-restrictive, that means you're not being restricted. With or without, you can always function. So let's look at what we have. It says, unlike essential adjective clauses, a non-essential adjective clause provides additional information about the noun and is not the main focus. It provides additional information, but it's not the main focus. So these kinds of clauses, even if removed, do not make a difference as the sentence still remains complete without it. A clause of this nature is enclosed within a pair of commas or brackets to separate it from the rest of the sentence. So here are some examples of non-restrictive or non-essential adjective clauses. Number one, my brother who lives in Australia will be coming to India next month. My brother who lives in Australia will be coming to India next month. Now look at this sentence closely. You will agree with me that if I remove who lives in Australia, I can still read the sentence. My brother will be coming to India next month. So that's why it's not restrictive. It's not restricted. Your removal of the subordinate clause within the sentence does not affect the meaning. It doesn't hinder the information it decides to pass to the reader. So my brother will be coming to India next month. The next one says the restaurant where we first met is being torn down. The restaurant where we first met is being torn down. So if I remove where we first met, I can read the sentence freely. The restaurant is being torn down. So the presence of the two commas does not restrict the information from being passed across. So here in non-restrictive, it still does the same function. It modifies the noun brother for the first sentence, and the second sentence it modifies the noun restaurant. So that is it. Now let's look at examples of adjective clauses. Examples of adjective clauses. Now the company that I worked for in 2018 is shutting down. Now this sentence is this type of adjective clause is the restrictive. Why? Because there is no comma. The information goes on. So the company that I worked for in 2018 is shutting down. So here we have that I worked for in 2018. That's the grammatical name as adjectival clause. Now what's the function? It modifies the noun company. This is the way it's written in your exam. That's the function. It modifies the noun company as it's rightly written. The second example says the girl who has shifted from Japan is here to meet you. The girl who has shifted from Japan is here to meet you. So this is non-restrictive. It's not restricting it. It can still pass the same information. You have your commas enclosed. Alright, so the function is that it modifies the noun girl. The third one says the man who came here earlier is on the phone and wants to talk to you. What's the function? It modifies the man. So you see that adjectival clause or relative clause is really easy to identify and to state the function because you already have specific words that introduce them and words that modify. Once you're conversant with the noun word, how to identify noun words, be it abstract, be it concrete noun, you wouldn't have any problems getting the right answer. The next one says the man who came here earlier is on the phone and wants to talk to you. So here we have who came here earlier as the adjective clause. Now what's the function? It modifies the noun man. The next one says Jeffrey, who scored the highest marks, has joined the army. Jeffrey, who scored the highest marks, has joined the army. Now the function, it modifies the noun Jeffrey, which is being described. We have my mom loved the bag that I had bought from London. My mom loved the bag that I had bought from London. The function, it modifies the noun bag. Remember we said that whatever adjective clause or adjective phrase modifies must appear immediately, or rather before the relative noun. It has to appear before the relative pronoun. Then we'll have the next example says, the girl whose parents died last year was adopted by my uncle. The girl whose parents died last year was adopted by my uncle. That's your, then the function, it modifies the noun girl. I did not know what to do with the dress. This is the noun word, and this is the adjective clause. The function, it modifies the noun dress. Nara and Naomi were not happy with the send-off party which we had organized. Send off is an adjective. Now here is the noun word. Remember, adjectives don't modify adjectives. Adjectives can only modify nouns or pronouns. So you can't put send off party as what it modifies. It rather modifies the noun party. That is it. Nobody saw the boy who came first in the running race. That is the boy who came first in the running race, and that's what modifies. And finally, you have the woman whom we talked so much about has left for the States, and the function is it modifies the noun woman. Alright, so let's look at one or two questions from the exam guide. Alright, let's take 2018. Let's take 2018, 2018. Let's see what we'll have there. Remember I said it has to be the comprehension passage. It's not anywhere else, but in the comprehension passage. So once you get there, you should be able to go to the passage. The question is already there, but you need to go back to the passage to identify your function. It's not what you do by guesswork, no. So once you see the question, you refer yourself back to the passage where the whole sentence is written. Okay. Okay, look at it. We have which went along with the hilarious drumming. Which went along with the hilarious drumming. Remember I told us something, that the word which, as a matter of fact, all relative pronouns can introduce noun clause or noun phrase. Yes, all relative pronouns can introduce noun clause or noun phrase. So the moment you see which, you shouldn't position your mind that it's adjectival. No, it must not necessarily be adjectival clause. It's possible it's noun clause or noun phrase. So that's the reason you have to go back to the comprehension passage, find out where you have the sentence, and go through the rules that guide adjectival clause or phrase. So now I have the sentence here. Look at where I have which went along with the hilarious drumming. But I have to go through the starting sentence. It reads thus: everybody was impressed with the feats. With the feats, that's outcome, the work done. That's a noun word. So because I have a noun word here, that introduces what? That makes you know that it's adjectival, because adjectival clauses or phrases will always modify the noun before the which. So this is it. So the grammatical name for this is adjectival clause. You'll write your answer, adjectival clause. Now let's look at the function. What is the function? Alright, you must have it at the back of your mind that once you're asked to state the grammatical name of an underlined part of a sentence, you would as well be asked to state the function. Reason for you to go through the sentence properly, because you obviously, if it's adjectival clause or phrase, you obviously see the noun word or pronoun word that the subordinate part of the sentence would describe or modify. Alright, so you can never have grammatical name without the function. As a matter of fact, they carry 2 marks each, or if I'm not mistaken, 2 marks for grammatical name, then the function 1 mark. So you can't afford to lose 3 marks. Right, so we've gone to the sentence where we got the grammatical name. We said that the grammatical name is adjectival clause, and we stated the function as modifying the noun fit. It modifies the noun fit. Alright, so let's take another one. Alright, so for 2020, we have another adjectival clause there. Now, if you look at the first paragraph, so sorry it's not underlined. Usually in the exam, you'll see that it's either underlined or written in italics or bolded. Anytime there is need for you to identify the grammatical name and function or any figurative expression, that part of the sentence will obviously be given a special format other than the usual one. So for this 2020, you have the sentence starting from, while the journey lasted, Mama chatted heartily with a fellow passenger who was also going to see her son in Lagos, and the two exchanged telephone numbers. So that's it. We are starting from who was going to see her son in Lagos. So this part of the subordinate sentence is called adjective clause or adjectival clause or relative clause. If you write any of these 3, you're definitely right. So this is adjectival clause. I prefer calling it adjectival clause, and it modifies the noun passenger. Please, the word fellow here is an adjective used to describe the passenger. So you wouldn't say that it modifies the noun fellow passenger. No, it's not. So you have to really be conversant with your parts of speech. Passenger is strictly the word that it modifies. Alright, so I won't leave you at this point, and I would advise that you go through the other years, check where you see grammatical names and functions, and identify if it's actually an adjectival clause or not. It can also be an adjectival phrase. I've made us know when it can be referred to as adjectival phrase. In a sentence, and the subordinate part of the sentence doesn't have a finite verb. Finite verbs are verbs that show tense. So if that part of the sentence doesn't have a finite verb, it can be referred to as a phrase. Now for this, we have just looked at adjectival clause. I've said that adjectival clause is the subordinate part of the sentence. I've defined adjective clauses as group of words that have finite verbs, can stand on their own, and they make sense. So that's that. Next time we would look at the noun clause, and I would then differentiate between the relative pronouns that introduce the adjectival clause and relative pronouns that introduce noun clause. Thank you for participating in today's class. You can practice more questions using the ExamGuide app. The app scores and gives a detailed explanation of all the questions at the end of your practice test. You can learn a particular topic of interest with different modes like study mode, mock mode, and practice mode. It also has other features that make learning fun. It is a must-have for all serious students. Download from www.examguide.com if you don't have it yet. See you in the next class. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and share the videos to people that will benefit from it. Bye.